Hello, everyone, and welcome to CivilNet. We are joined today by commentator and longtime U.S. political consultant Eric Hacopian to continue our ongoing discussion of the upcoming presidential elections in the United States and their potential impact on Armenia. Eric, John, thanks so much for stopping.
It's a pleasure.
Let's start with the state of politics and political activism within the Armenian American community. How do you evaluate that?
Well, the level of it is actually quite low, and it's quite unsophisticated given both the size of the community and the wealth and the access to resources in the community. It is nowhere as influential as it should be. It certainly doesn't drive policy. It doesn't drive any particular agenda. To the extent that it is active, it gets blown around by the winds of what the events are. And on an organizational level, the primary organizations that sort of represent the community don't really have a programmatic approach to move a ball forward, specifically when it comes to the interests of the Republic of Armenia.
And why do you think that's the case?
I think it has to do with the peculiarities of the organizational setups in the diaspora, that many of them are, in one case, are associated with a political party in Armenia whose primary task is not to work with the government of Armenia, but actually to overthrow it. So I think it's very hard to do that when you, in almost every other case, the lobbying group, the ethnic lobbying group in the United States actually works directly with the government in many ways. Not always that they don't agree on everything, but their main task is strengthening the relationship of that country with the powers that be in the United States. There are third or fourth parties that are actually getting involved in this process that are more effective and will become far more effective. But when you look at the scale of what's possible to what's actually the product that we're getting, as far as the access, it's very low.
So I want to follow up on that. For many years, Armenian American political activists rallied mostly around two causes: recognition of the Armenian genocide and support for Nagorno-Karabakh. But both of those issues, as of now, are closed. President Biden recognized the genocide in 2021, and Azerbaijan ethnically cleansed Nagorno-Karabakh last year. What do you see happening now? Where are folks redirecting their attention to?
I think there's, first of all, the Artsakh issue is not closed, because there's obviously the issue of the right of return, which is going to be an issue for the next multiple decades, I'm guessing, because that's an international light that doesn't go away. I think what you will be looking at is the agenda will switch, at least among the functional people, to things like deepening U.S.-Armenia relations, specifically in the sector of military aid or military sales, or actually more specifically parts for our defense industries here. So it becomes far more practical in that sense. The second part of it is sort of the deeper integration of Armenia into the U.S.-led Western system, which is, again, something that has 1,001 components in 1,001 areas, from the most recent one being the nuclear plant issue. But there's a lot of other things. So I think it really has to do, given the fact that Armenia has also made this pivot to the West, it's about institutionalizing Armenia's relationship with the United States in more significant ways, which is something that is practically, frankly, far more doable than many of the other things that Armenian Americans have been advocating for before. And
I'm wondering, integration or pivoting west is a very kind of broad, overarching topic. In your view, what concrete policies should Armenian Americans be demanding from their elected officials?
I think when you look at it, I mean, first and foremost, you start with the issue of the prisoners. I think there's unique things in the law now when it comes to Magnitsky sanctions, where that you can actually target individuals that are targeting a state. So I think you're looking at the issue of freeing the prisoners and using the mechanisms in the law or sanctions to do that. Secondly, it's to have to defend Armenia in the sense of from further aggression from Azerbaijan by having triggering sanctions, that if you do this will happen. Obviously, having a high level of relationship in which the United States can act forcefully politically to stop that or to prevent that from happening. And then I think things that have to do with specific defense, opening up the U.S. weapons market to Armenia, which is the last weapons market that's not open. We have the ability to essentially buy weapons from almost all Western countries now, except the United States. Further expanding starting U.S. military aid to Armenia, very much in the EU model of what started this year. So I think, and things having to do, for example, we have 120,000 refugees, of which it's estimated it's going to take $1 billion and a half to actually integrate them or to provide housing. So I think those are the kinds of things. It's about practicalities of upgrading everything from funding to political relationships to integration into Western institutions. And lastly, and more importantly, which is something that happens on its own, is actually, it's actually business investments in Armenia. And some of it is already happening in a particular field, which is IT. You have companies like NVIDIA and other Intel and other ones who are here, a Synopsys. But I think some of these larger companies, they take a political nod so that this country is acceptable and this country is not. And this is something that needs to be made clear. And you see with some of that, for example, with Gulf moving in here, something as minor as Gulf moving in here and opening up gas stations. We had Shell last year, which is more of an English, is actually a British company. So I think it's about the nod about this is the place that you can go and invest. So I think it's quite broad. But it's instead of having it be one or two big things, it's really 15 or 20 smaller things.
Well, thank you for laying that out. That's helpful. I'm wondering, on the other side, on the candidate side, are you seeing actually policies like that being proposed or even discussed? What have we seen in terms of both Kamala Harris and Donald Trump reaching or not reaching out to American Armenian voters?
No, I think that there's I have not seen anything. I think we're at the beginning of stages of what they always have, this Armenians for Kamala, Armenians for Biden, Armenians for Trump. But that's what that really is. That's like third-rate outreach, in which more serious communities get serious consideration and serious agendas and proposals, while second or third level communities that aren't organized get this kind of an effort, which is really not about you outreaching to the community. The outreach is for the community to be helpful to you. So I think until you fix the first one, which is to have serious organizations that are interested in lobbying and strengthening Armenia-U.S. relations, and building on that and having very specific demands, unless you have an agenda, it's very hard for them to meet it. But I mean, for example, I can just give you a perfect example of what can be done. Like, for example, there's about 5 or 6 relevant swing states, and only one of them really has, 2 of them actually, Michigan and Nevada, but Nevada specifically have a large number of Armenian voters. You can do a simple thing, it's like, listen, I'm going to be sending a mailer out to every Armenian voter in Nevada. You tell me what Mr. Trump, tell us what your positions are on these particular issues, and Ms. Harris, tell us what, and we'll put them next to each other. And I'll guarantee you, they will all scramble to come up with the most favorable positions. But that's the kind of political thinking that you do not see, because the community is not organized to be politically sophisticated on that level, especially in using campaigns to push a particular agenda.
I'm glad that you bring up the swing state issue too, because I wonder how much of what we're talking about, aside from the organizational issues, is also a function of Armenians' concentration in California, which, regardless of what the Armenians there do, will go to the Democrats. If you compare to some other ethnic groups which are more concentrated in the swing states, do you think that also that is playing a role?
Oh, absolutely. And you actually even see this where the Jewish vote used to be a lot more important when Ohio and Florida were in play, but Ohio and Florida are no longer in play. And in most of these other places, Jewish voters are marginal in nature. So you see that a lot. But frankly, political influence is not just simply being in swing states. It's about the money that you raise, it's the money that you give. It's about having small numbers of passionately organized people that raise their voices and make a lot of noise and are very active. And that's no matter, you're always going to have these places that change from place to place as far as what the focus of any election campaign is. But there are 1,000 ways to make yourself more important. You can set up, phone banks in California with, 300 kids that are calling all over the country, and people will recognize that. It's a question of understanding the way campaigns work and how you can make yourself valuable in that context.
So let's switch gears a bit and talk about the Democratic National Convention, which has dominated headlines across the US last week. Notably, Armenia's ambassador to the US, Lilit Makuns, was there. I should add that she was also at the Republican National Convention last month. What do you think about that?
I think it's excellent. I think she's doing her job. She has to be in both of these places. You have to become a creature of Washington, and campaigns are the lifeblood of Washington. Money and campaigns. So yes, you have to have a presence, and I think I'm very glad she was at the Republican convention. And in fact, they weren't just at the convention. I think they held an event of some kind in which they had a booth or a room or whatever it was. It was sort of an event that they were holding for delegates. So I think it's exactly what she should be doing. And the question is why we have not been doing this for the past 30 years. That's really the better question. Not that she's there. She's there. To the extent that she's there, she's doing her job correctly.
And one last question for you, Eric. As of now, what's your take on the horse race? Kamala Harris or Donald Trump?
Well, I think we're looking at, prior to the switch over to Vice President Harris, you had I called it a 95-5 race in which Trump was going to win in the 95th percentile. Now what you have is you have a nearly 50% situation in which either side can win. I think if you look at the fundamentals of the direction, there's the fundamentals you look at outside of the candidates, which is the direction of the country and how people feel about themselves financially. People by a margin of more than 2.5 to 1, think that the country is going in the wrong direction, which is always the best indicator of an election, which means that is very helpful to the out party. Same thing, people think that their living standards are actually falling, mostly because of housing costs and inflation. So all of these things point to a Trump victory, or to the out party, the party that is not in power. But then again, you run into the man himself, which is if Trump himself becomes the issue, Vice President Harris has a much better chance of winning, because Trump himself, as much as he has very fervent followers, has been rejected twice by 52-53% of the country. But in the US system, as you know, you can actually get less votes and you can actually win if you get the right combination of states, as he did in 2016. So you have a race in which the fundamentals are with the challenger, in this case, Mr. Trump, while at the same time, he himself is the problem. To the extent that this race over the next 70, 80 days becomes about how much do you hate Donald Trump or how much do you fear him, the vice president is very likely to win. If it comes down to how your living standards are and what you think of the future of the country, then it's much more likely for the opposite to happen. I think, and if you look at the convention, all these they want Trump to go out there and talk about personal things. That's why they attacked him personally, because they expect him to respond. And the more he talks about personal things and silly things like, is she black, is she Indian, things like that, the more he's not talking about the issues that they fear. And that's a trap that they've laid out for him, and so far he's been walking into it. But if you look at this race, that the fundamentals are with Trump. It's really a question of does he have the capacity to destroy the fundamental advantages he has? And yes, he does, but then we're talking about, this is an election that's going to be decided by probably 50,000 votes spread between 3 or 4 different states.
Well, Eric, thanks so much for joining us, and we'll look forward to continuing this conversation later.
It's a pleasure.
And thank you for joining us on CivilNet.